Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. It is approximately 1:03 Mountain Time, and we welcome you to Building Native Communities, Financial Skills for Families, 5th edition certification. We are proud to be partnering with First Nations Development Institute on this webinar. First Nations Awista Corporation's mission is to provide opportunities for Native people to develop financial assets and create wealth by assisting in the establishment of strong, permanent institutions and programs, contributing to economic independence, strengthening sovereignty for all Native communities. And First Nations Development Institute's mission is to strengthen American Indian economies to support healthy Native communities. First Nations invests in and creates innovative institution models that strengthen asset control and support economic development for American Indian people and their communities. So next, I'd like to start the webinar off by having all of the participants answer the question, what organization are you representing today? Please locate the question and answer feature on the webinar platform and just type in that question, and we'll wait for everyone to answer. Okay, great. It looks like we have representation from Florida, from the National Indian Youth Council, Muskogee Loan Fund, Bad River, and I'm just going to continue with the webinar as people locate that feature, and thank you so much for joining us from across the nation. Next, I'm going to have a poll and have you utilize that same feature just to get you acquainted with the question and answer box in case you have questions throughout the webinar presentation. So next, I'd like you to answer, are you certified, or are you a certified BNC trainer? And if so, what edition are you certified in? Great. As people are answering, it looks like we have 3 so far in the 4th edition, 1 non-certified trainer, someone is certified in the 3rd edition. And after this training, those that are certified in the 4th edition have the opportunity to take a test and certify into our 5th edition curriculum. So again, thank you all for joining us. And without further ado, I would like to turn the webinar over to Caleb Selby, our programs officer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Selby. I'm a programs officer with First Nations Awista Corporation. We're excited to have everyone listening today and just very proud of the 5th edition BNC, and we're excited to be talking about it with you all. Later on today, we'll have Sarah DeWeese, the Senior Director of Research and Asset Building Programs from First Nations Development Institute speaking, and we'll also have Chris Hansen, my colleague. He's also a Programs Officer with First Nations Awista Corporation. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's webinar is to tell you all about the changes that we've made to the 5th edition BNC curriculum. We want to detail the recertification process for those listeners that are 4th edition BNC graduates, and then also update those same folks to the 5th edition BNC. We want to let you all know about the responsibilities associated with being a 5th edition graduate, And then through all this, we'll get a snapshot of what the BNC curriculum contains. So for anybody that's not 4th edition certified, or if you don't know anything about the BNC curriculum, by listening in on this webinar, you'll kind of get a snapshot of what it's all about. Next slide, please. So first I'll talk about an overview of the certification process. If you are a 4th edition graduate, you can either watch this webinar and pass the webinar test, which will be distributed at the end of the webinar, or you can attend a 5th edition training in person, and I'll have a lineup of those upcoming trainings at the end of the webinar. I mean, as I was saying, if you're not a 4th edition graduate, you'll need to attend a 5th edition in-person training. This webinar won't suffice to get you certified. Next slide, please. I'd also like to talk about the responsibilities of 5th edition graduates, because those have changed just a little bit as well. Firstly, you must fill out the annual instructor survey, and that's generally sent out in the August to September timeframe. It takes about 10 minutes or so, and it asks a few questions about whether or not you run or are part of a financial education program. And we send this out just because we want to know a little bit about your financial education program so that we can make sure we're offering trainings that cater to your needs. The second responsibility is that you'll need to get recertified every 5 years. If a new edition of the BNC curriculum comes out before your 5 years passes, we'll host a webinar, and you'll be able to recertify that way, in the same way. Well, that's a function of this webinar. But we do want 5th edition graduates to attend a BNC training in person every 5 years. So unless a revised and updated curriculum comes out before your 5 years is up, we'll ask that you attend an in-person training. So that's it with the recertification portion of today's webinar. I'd like to introduce Sarah DeWeese with First Nations Development Institute.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Sarah with First Nations. Thanks, Caleb. So, yeah, I'm really happy to have you guys on the webinar today. I know you're on this webinar because you are passionate about the Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families curriculum and are either currently using it in your communities or have used it in the past or are interested in using it in the future. So we hope this webinar kind of makes you more acquainted with the 5th edition. And I actually share Caleb's enthusiasm about the 5th edition. I'm very excited to share with you all of the changes and modifications we've made. If you were using the 4th edition, you were probably familiar with some of the challenges because, as you may know, that 4th edition was completed about 4 years ago. And if you're like me, you've probably noticed really big changes in the world of technology, whether it be the fact that it's very easy to find online calculators now, or that there are mobile apps for paying your bills. I'm embarrassed to admit I just found out only 3 years ago that you can take a picture of a check and deposit it in your bank. That's the kind of technology that just really wasn't around when we did the 4th edition. So we've updated the 5th edition, next slide please, to make sure that we address some of those changes in technology. We've also added some new content because the field of financial education has changed a lot, and I think we have a better understanding about what motivates people's financial behavior. And it's not just math, and it's not just, you know, access to resources, but it's also kind of attitudes and your feelings about money. So we've added some new content, which I'll go over in a minute, but really addressing in many ways, you know, how people act as consumers, what motivates them as consumers, and how advertisers manipulate people to separate their money from their pocketbook. So definitely a lot of new content. We've also, a lot of the research about financial management shows that just kind of some basic math is really valuable when trying to balance your own budget or think about, you know, a spending plan. And so we've added something that we call money math bubbles. I think we can all agree that financial education should be taught in high school, especially in this day and age when we have so many people contacting us to get, you know, credit cards or to, you know, buy things over the phone or buy things, you know, kind of everywhere you turn, there's ads now. And so The problem is, of course, it's not taught in high school. Now, math is taught, but math is also often taught in a way that it doesn't really apply to your personal finance. So what we've done is taken some really basic math concepts and inserted them in what we call money math bubbles to help people think through, well, how long does it take to save up $500 if, you only have a year to save? Or if you can't spend more than 10% of your income on a loan, what's 10% of your income? So I'll talk a little bit more about those money math bubbles as well. And you'll see when they present the updated sessions where those changes were made. And then finally, we have new illustrations and graphics. Next slide, please. And those of you who used the 4th edition know that we used a cartoonist. He's actually a pretty famous cartoonist down in the Southwest named Ricardo Kate. And he did a great job illustrating a lot of our concepts. But what we heard from instructors and others is that there was an interest in additional illustrations, but also in what we like to call infographics. And here's another thing that will date me and show my age, but increasingly younger generations are used to looking at things on their cell phones or scrolling through Facebook, and so people don't kind of sit and read paragraphs and paragraphs of information anymore. They're interested in something a lot more visual. So what you can see on the left there is an infographic that we created to help teach the concept of persuasion tactics, or how do advertisers try to get you to spend your money. And so that's, of course, covered in a paragraph, but then we also include a graphic that kind of helps you think about the concept. In addition to that, we did have some stock photos, but we also had photos of community members from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and we used those as illustrations as well in the new 5th edition curriculum. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about the changes because I know they're going to cover that as they talk about all the different sections of the workbook and the specific changes that were made. But what I wanted to share with you is that in addition to the new workbook, we've created a new web portal, which is kind of a one-stop shop for Native financial education. And specifically, there's a whole section of it dedicated to the 5th edition of the Building Native Communities curriculum. So if you go to that main URL, bncweb.org, you'll be able to click on a link that will take you to a section that allows you to download a PDF of the participants workbook if you want to just check it out before you order it. But there's also a link that will take you to the instructor guide. And the instructor guide is really quite big, and there's a lot of very good information in it. So we've actually broken it down chapter by chapter because to download the whole document it's quite a production and to print it. But if you want to just download a few chapters, you can download it chapter by chapter. There's also information about how to order hard copies of the workbook there, which usually involves contacting Chris Hansen at First Nations Owista, and I think they're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar. But we do encourage you to go to the bncweb.org website to learn more about and download the Financial Skills for Families curriculum, but also download other resources like videos or games or other teaching tools for teaching financial education. Okay, next slide, please. And then finally, before I hand it over to Caleb and Chris, I wanted to take a moment to thank the advisory committee, which really helped shape this 5th edition of the curriculum. And we made an effort to reach out to people we know are pretty heavy users of the they were at the time, the 4th edition Financial Skills for Families curriculum. And these, they had a lot of great insights and thoughts about ways to improve the 5th edition. And this included Don Wesley, Sonny Guillory at Northwest Indian College, Lisa Garcia, who used to be with Salt River Financial Services Institute, Arnold Bloom, who is with a high school in Gallup, New Mexico, Tawny Wilson, who's with First Nations Development Institute, and then Sean Winters, who's with a CDFI in Michigan. So we really appreciate their input, and I think they did a great job improving the 5th edition. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Chris, and he'll start talking about some of the specific changes that were made in the chapters.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Christopher Hansen. I'm the Financial Education and Asset Building Programs Officer here at Owista. Okay, next slide, thank you. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the method of presentation for this webinar is going to be as follows. A red X on the slide means that something has been cut from the curriculum. If something's been revised, it will have a new and improved logo, and a green cross will indicate new material that's been added to the session. Make sure to look for these images as they will show up next to all the changes made in the 5th edition. However, not every session has cuts, revisions, and additional information in, so keep that in mind as well. Next slide. Thank you. So, some talking points here. Additions to Session 1. Understanding our role as a consumer has some additions, the power of advertising, and consumer tips. So, in this day and age, we as consumers are bombarded with advertisements. These advertisements can be seen in many forms, whether we see a commercial for Nike shoes, product placements in a movie, even a logo on a t-shirt. We are inundated with advertisements. The average American sees about 3,000 images in some form of advertisement per day. That's a lot. We see so much advertising now that a lot of times we don't even recognize that it's happening anymore. That is why we've added the power of advertising. In this section, we talk about how to be immune to the power of advertising. We're going to give some consumer tips. Some of the tips that we talk about are limiting the amount of time we watch spending television, adding your phone number to the National Do Not Call Registry, disabling pop-up ads, a couple others, use caution when downloading free mobile apps, and keeping an eye out for persuasion tactics. Next slide, please. So those are the changes in Session 1. Revisions to Session 2. We have quite a few of them here, so I'm going to list them all. In Session 2, we revised the TAT system usage by using a case study, the Stevens family, whose picture is up there. That's the Stevens family. So participants have concrete examples to understand the application of the TAT system. Just as a reminder, the TATS acronym stands for Track, Assess, Taking Action, and Save. I also want to mention that we do have the financial journals available that has all the tracking budgeting worksheets that we reused in the 4th edition for you to use with your students. I like the addition of the Stevens family to teach your students how to use the sheets and get comfortable with using them to develop the Stevens spending plan. I would then challenge your students to go home and use the journals to develop their own spending plans. We also have tracking budgeting worksheets available at the website that Sarah mentioned, www.bncweb.org. Next slide, please. So for the new TAT system, we have some tables that are listed into the workbook. The tables get more and more in-depth as the session progresses. Participants suggest which expenses could be reduced, which are fixed, flexible, and luxury, so we kept those in there. Participants also go through and use the system to suggest how much expenses could be reduced by the Stevens family. It's kind of fun to see some of the cuts that people think the Stevens family should make as well. It always makes for an interesting class. Next slide. All right, here is the example of a money math bubble that Sarah was talking about. I believe this is the first one you're going to see in the curriculum. Throughout the curriculum, we have added money math bubbles almost in every session. I like these money math bubbles because it gives you as an instructor a chance to make sure that your students have the math skills needed to complete this session. It's a good way to gauge whether or not you feel the class might need some math refresher lessons. So all money math bubbles are going to appear in orange bubbles, just like this one. They're kind of like a break from the curriculum, but they follow the theme of the content for which they appear. Let's see, money math bubbles answers are found in the instructor's guide to the best practices chapter as well. Next slide. So some more additions to Session 2. Let's see here. Get organized is a new session part that we added to it. Organization is important in being able to use the TAT system, along with keeping track of our own finances. A new graphic was added to show how to get organized, and it's listed there on your webinar screen. Page 86 of the instructor's guide has an exercise around creating financial record-keeping systems as well. So great information there. Adding tips for managing spending. In Session 2, we've also added some tips for managing spending. And some of the examples of that would be buy used when you can, check online for things that you want to purchase if possible, go to the library to rent books and movies, make a shopping list before you shop and buy only items on your list. A few other ones, don't carry your credit cards with you. Make yourself wait a day before making a purchase that would use a credit card. Here's my favorite one, freeze your cards in water. I actually use iced tea because I figured out that if I run the block of ice under hot water with my credit card frozen in there, I could read the credit card numbers without melting it all the way. So use iced tea or coffee if you need to. That really helps me. Just an extra tip there for you. Next slide. Okay, revisions to session 3. For session 3, we've added a couple revisions. The numbers in the balancing Rebecca's checkbook exercise have been revised. So if you're thinking that you can use the 4th edition ones, the numbers have changed. Also, the account statement and check register were put on facing pages, so the exercise is a lot easier to facilitate. If you recall in the 4th edition, the students had to flip pages repeatedly while doing this exercise, so hopefully that makes things a little bit easier for you. We also have improved the tips for using online and mobile banking. Like Sarah mentioned before, there have been so many changes to online and mobile banking that we thought this would be pertinent. Some of the things that we mentioned in here are wireless networks are hacker-friendly. If you have poor reception, that means there's going to be less security on that connection that you're using. So be careful if you're accessing your banks that way. Make sure you safeguard your phone. You may have to wait to access newly deposited funds, so be aware of that. And there's a lot of fraudulent apps out there that look a lot like banking apps. So making sure you're identifying which are real and which aren't. Let's see here. Some other revisions to session 3. We've moved the topic of identity theft from session 6 into session 3 now. With the changes made to session 6, we felt identity theft would flow better with this session. We also have added more information on common types of identity theft. For instance, someone using your name and social security number to apply for credit, someone using your name and social number to open a bank account, someone stealing your social security number to file taxes. All are examples of identity theft. And how a person can get your information, stealing social security numbers or getting hacked on your computer. And we also talk about ways to protect yourself from that. Okay, so those are the changes to sessions 1 through 3. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Caleb, and he's going to talk about 4 through 6.
Great. Hello again, everyone. Thanks, Chris. So I'll jump right into it as well if you want to hit next slide. Thank you. So I'll start with revisions to the 4th session of the curriculum. In the 4th edition, we asked participants about the advantages and disadvantages of using credit. And in the 5th edition, the advantages and disadvantages are actually listed out. Participants still get an opportunity to answer, but we found in trainings that a little more direction in this exercise would be beneficial. And that said, this session should still be taught in a conversational tone. Some of the information added for advantages of credit is that you can afford things now. Oftentimes, credit is convenient. Your credit score will improve if you pay your balance on time because lenders will trust your ability to pay back down the road. And also, credit use is required by certain companies, like car rental companies, for example. So you'll gain access to things that you wouldn't have otherwise when you use credit. And then also, depending on who your credit card is through, you can get awards like airline miles or points at hotels, other things of that nature. Some of the disadvantages that we list are credit can be expensive. It can lead to impulse buying. It can lead to this feeling of oops. Maybe you bought something that you couldn't afford. And bad credit can lead to difficulty using credit down the road, which in the same way that you gained access to certain things by using credit responsibly, you can lose access to certain things with poor credit management. So that's some of the information that we added to session 4 around advantages and disadvantages of using credit. Next slide, please. So we'll jump to session 5 here. The 5th edition BNC evaluates Wanda Bell, Rocky Thompson, Sandy Nighthorse, Sharon and Ron Coleman, and Anderson Begay in the evaluating loan application section. And for those of you that have used the 4th edition a lot, these are the same folks that are in the 4th edition, but the details for each are different. The numbers are updated not to match any singular client, but to be accurate with numbers that we see in the field. And this, we made changes like this all throughout the 5th edition curriculum because one big goal of the 5th edition was for its exercises and content to be practical and applicable. These case studies were updated to reflect that idea. So an example of a change would be in the 4th edition, Sandy had 3 jobs in the last year. Her car continually broke down. She spent about $300 fixing her car every time it broke down. She worked at a grocery store for $7.25 an hour. She lived in reservation housing and paid the minimum rent each month. Her total expenses per month was $200 and her total monthly income was $400. And Sandy wanted to borrow $2,000 to pay for a new car. In the 5th edition, Sandy has to spend $600 every time her car breaks down. She's working at a nursing home making $9.50 an hour. She pays $100 per month for housing. She gets $200 in SNAP every month. Her total monthly income is around $950. And in the 5th edition, Sandy wants to borrow $5,000 to purchase a newer car. So just please be aware that some of the answers that you typically would have gotten for these exercises will be different for the 4th edition. Next slide. We also have revisions in Session 5 to the cost of credit section. These changes were made because in trainings we noted that certain terms would be discussed in depth that weren't adequately defined beforehand. These terms included loan principal, interest, and loan fees. So in the 5th edition, we spent some time defining these terms so that they're used, so that when they're used throughout the session, participants have a better idea, a more concrete idea of what's being discussed. These revisions are a great example of how we've added graphics to facilitate understanding of concepts discussed, like Sarah was mentioning early in this presentation. So we can understand visually the cost of credit and the composition of a loan. We can see how loan principal and interest and fees all fit together to make the total loan amount. So this section is great for visual learners, and it's an example of how we've just tried to add a visual aspect of learning to the BNC curriculum. Next slide, please. Additions to Session 5. We've also updated the visuals for the 5 C's of credit. The 5 C's are the same, but in the 5th edition it looks a bit more aesthetically pleasing, again going with the improved graphics and aids for visual learners. And this also demonstrates the idea that all of the 5 C's are connected, so we like the new graphic for that reason as well. Next slide, please. And I'll jump into Session 6 here. The payment factor table from Session 6 was removed, and it was removed as a result of the advent of online loan repayment calculators. Financial education practitioners generally let us know that payment factor tables were no longer necessary, so it wasn't included in the 5th edition. Now, we have gotten some feedback from some trainers that mentioned that they liked the payment factor tables in the curriculum, in which case I would recommend supplementing the 5th edition by either using the needed parts from the 4th edition or print a handout of the payment factor table, which can be accessed in OWISTA's Trainers Portal, which I'll talk about later. The folks that like the payment factor table say that it demonstrates how payment calculators work online. So this will depend on your class. If your class wants to see the gears in the machine, this is an appropriate supplement to the curriculum. But if they simply want to know how to calculate total loan amount and monthly payments, then there are newer and faster ways to do it online. The decision to use payment factor table or not will also depend on how much time you have with your client. So there's just lots of things to consider when deciding whether or not you want to use this. But just know that it was removed from the 5th edition. Next slide, please. More revisions to Session 6. You'll notice that Session 6 was a lot of cuts and revisions and additions to Session 6. But we have a revision to the section on life insurance. In the 4th edition, the section on life insurance confused a few folks. So in the 5th edition, we try to alleviate that confusion by addressing the difference between term life insurance and cash value and the benefits of both types. So we added key questions people have about life insurance, like do I need it, how much do I need, when should I buy it, who in my life should have life insurance, and what should the term length be. And we recommend reading through this section thoroughly before teaching it, as the material is just denser than it was in the 4th edition, but it's all good and necessary material. We also added a case study so that the theory on life insurance can be practiced. And I'll talk a little bit about that case study here. We look at a Rachel who is a single parent raising kids of ages 3 and 5, and both her parents are disabled and they live with her and help out with childcare. So we just give a little snippet of Rachel's situation in a couple paragraphs, and then we ask participants, does she need life insurance? How much does she need? Why does she need it? Should she wait to obtain life insurance, and who's at risk if she doesn't purchase life insurance? So we ask an array of questions here, and the case study really makes participants of the class pause and realize the importance of having life insurance, even those participants that previously didn't see a need for it. And participants are then able to look back at the theory and answer the questions. I'd also say in the 5th edition trainings we've conducted so far, this revised section has really done well in facilitating understanding of life insurance, and participants enjoy and value it. I can say Chris Hansen here, every time he comes back from a training, always comments on how well this section went in the training. So we're proud of that addition to the 5th edition. Some additions to Session 6. We have a few additions to Session 6. Among those are sections called the Money Math Car Buyers Edition and Glenda's Payday Loan Saga. So first, in order to demonstrate how to be a savvy consumer, we have added that Money Math Car Buyers Edition, and it demonstrates games that car dealerships can play. But it serves a couple purposes. It gives the opportunity for you as trainers to hold a discussion about some of the nefarious tactics that car dealerships employ and how to avoid them. Once you get the class sharing their experiences, it gets to be a very enlightening discussion. We found that letting discussion flow freely when you're teaching on this topic is really beneficial to the class. It also gives you a chance to compare how much interest you end up paying per payment with a higher monthly payment and a lower monthly payment, which teaches that a lot of the time a lower monthly payment is not the only thing to consider when taking out a loan. For Glenda's Payday Loan Saga, we've added a case study that demonstrates how using a payday loan service can be a detriment to your savings goals. And it shows the incredible amounts of fees and interest that rapidly accumulate when a payday lender is used. In the example, Glenda takes out 2 payday loans during a holiday season and then struggles to pay them off. Each loan charges a $15 fee for every $100 borrowed, or 15%, with a full amount due on Glenda's next biweekly payday. And we recommend that you use a flip chart or a whiteboard to conduct this exercise because it's particularly useful to see the balances at each stage of the saga. Listing each fee while you're going through the bubbles in class just removes all doubts that the small fees over the life of the payday loan really can be very damaging. Next slide. More additions to Session 6 here. We have new tips and graphics on how to be a savvy consumer. The added tips are applicable skills, which goes along with the theme of real-life applicability that I was mentioning earlier. Research, affordability, payment options, and negotiating are the 4 main steps to being a savvy consumer, and you'll see that graphic on the right side of your webinar screen. There's a lot to talk about in successful negotiation, so we continue to detail that in the following pages, and that's what the graphic on the left is showing. So we list out in the visual on the left things like do your homework so you know exactly what you want to purchase, and no distractions is a pointer, for example, so leave your kids at home so you can focus fully on the purchase at hand. So a lot of these things are things that participants know already, and they seem pretty common sense, but maybe as consumers we don't spend a lot of time thinking on them. And we added them here because we want BNC participants to be very educated and empowered consumers. And a big part of that is successful negotiation. So we chose to focus on that in the 5th edition. You can be, another part about wanting to have more information on successful negotiation. You can be prepared in all other areas of savvy consumership, but if you don't know how to effectively negotiate, then all that careful preparation can be wasted. And as far as teaching this new content, it's worked well thus far to go through each tip with the class and have them share stories where they made a big purchase with the class, and then the class can comment on what that person should have done differently. Or oftentimes if the trainer shares when he or she made a big purchase and then asks the class to comment on what should have been done differently, that works well too. And what we found is that if the trainer shares in this example, it's a good way for the trainer to connect with the class. So maybe if you're having a hard time connecting with your class, or they're just not wanting to speak a ton, this can be a good way to get discussion flowing. Next slide, please. We also added an example called Wallace Goes Truck Shopping, which gives participants an opportunity to comment on what Wallace, a guy who walks into a local car dealership and ends up purchasing a truck, what he should have done differently. This is a great example of what not to do when buying a car. As an idea for an additional exercise, challenge your participants to flip the script on Wallace by creating a dialogue or making a skit using an empowered and knowledgeable Wallace. So in this exercise, we can ask, how can Wallace's bad decisions be changed into good decisions? And this has been another popular exercise in the 5th edition trainings that we've had so far. Next slide, please. We also added to Session 6 information on the Affordable Care Act and its implications for Native Americans. And so I'll just give a little snippet here. Beginning in 2014, the Affordable Care Act required all Americans to obtain health insurance or claim an exemption. Native Americans and individuals eligible for IHS services can qualify for an exemption based on the federal responsibility of IHS. However, many people might be covered under an employer's plan or choose to purchase their own insurance, either privately or through a health insurance exchange commonly known as the marketplace. Certain low-income individuals and families can also qualify for reduced payments when purchasing insurance through the marketplace. So whichever option you choose, it's important to remember that each year you'll need to either claim an exemption for you and your dependents or obtain what's known as minimum essential coverage as defined by the government. Failure to do so will result in a tax penalty known as a shared responsibility payment. For more information on your benefits, rights, and responsibilities under the Affordable Care Act, visit the Indian Health Service website at ihs.gov or the National Health Insurance Exchange website at www.healthcare.gov. For more individualized assistance, you can also contact a patient benefits coordinator available at your local IHS facility or service unit. Service unit. As you can see, this information can be really nuanced and complex, and I just read about it for like a whole minute there. So it's a good time to spend some time. It's a good idea to spend some time making sure your participants understand it, because it's just really dense and difficult material. Next slide, please. We have some more additions to Session 6. We have added a Circle of Life exercise, and we really wanted to add a good conclusion to the 5th edition BNC because we felt that its introduction was strong. So we just wanted a good conclusion to match it, something to wrap up the whole curriculum. So in this exercise, each season contains certain responsibilities that a person must be aware of in order to maintain financial health. The spring corresponds to youth, and to maintain financial health, in the curriculum we have activities that youth can be engaged in. They can be given an allowance. For teens, you can help them gain work experience by getting a part-time job. You can have them open a savings account for a child and help them start saving money in it. If teens are working or receiving a minor's trust payment, they may need to file an annual tax return, and you can help them learn this process. Also, for each season, we have questions that correspond to each season. So for the spring, we have a question that's, can you think of other strategies to help kids learn about money? The next season is the summer, and this is the young adult phase. We have ages 19 to 30. These are, of course, loose ranges of age here, but financial activities in this period could be develop work and career skills by going to college, learning a valuable trade, or starting a business, finding a career that you enjoy. And then as this period relates to financial health, people can be opening a checking account if you don't have one already, create and start using a budgeting or spending plan, start using your organization and record-keeping skills to develop a personal filing system, file your annual tax returns. And then also, unique to this period, people might start using credit. So the season contains tips on how to use credit wisely. So some of those tips include obtain your first credit card and make sure that you pay off the balance each month. Begin reviewing your credit report annually. Borrow cautiously, so be careful with auto loans and student loans. Also unique to this season, people might start laying a secure foundation for their future. So consider purchasing a home, review your risks and purchase insurance, begin saving for retirement, create an emergency savings fund to cover 3 months of expenses. This will be useful if you lose your job or have an unplanned expense. The next season that we have is the fall or middle age, ages 31 to 60. And the Circle of Life exercise recommends that people continue to practice good financial habits that I've already mentioned. So maintaining your spending plan, maintain your personal files and records, file your annual tax returns. In this season, if you have the resources, take some important financial steps like consider purchasing a home if you haven't yet, pay off existing debts when you can, continue to borrow cautiously, continue to lay a secure foundation for your future. Also, unique to this season, you may start considering other types of investments or cash flows. So, for example, non-retirement investment accounts, investment or rental property, small business investment, things of that nature. In this season, too, we have some unique things around taking care of the ones that you love. So save for your children's education and other needs. Review your insurance needs. Maybe you write a will and address other estate planning needs. And also consider charitable donations to worthy causes. The final season is the winter phase, 61 and over. This contains, the financial activities of this season are pretty similar to previous seasons that I've already talked about, like filing tax returns, budgeting, using credit wisely, looking out for loved ones. But also in the season, we might do a few things like start using your retirement savings. So if you're retired, begin drawing down on retirement savings as needed. Review your Social Security benefits. Continue building retirement savings as needed if you're still working. New activities in taking care of your family. Maybe you establish a savings account or nest egg for children or grandchildren. Review and update your will and address other estate planning needs. And even though this is the last season, you can also plan for the future. So consider selling, liquidating, or gifting long-term investments. Review your insurance needs and adjust your insurance as necessary. So there's a lot of recommendations in this added Circle of Life exercise, and you can see how it's an appropriate conclusion to the 5th edition BNC. It summarizes and kind of organizes everything that you've learned in the book up to this point. So next slide, please. I just wanted to have another graphic here on your Circle of Life. So if you can all take a look at that. But next slide, please. Great. So I just have some wrap-ups and reminders to talk about here. We've mentioned it a few times already, but bncweb.org is a great resource for everybody. Like Sarah was saying, it was designed to be a one-stop shop for Native financial education practitioners. You'll find more information on many of the Native financial education tools currently available, like BNC Financial Skills for Families, BNC Investing. You'll find more information on several curriculums and tools to help youth practice handling minors' trust payments. And you also find just more general publications that deal with Native financial education. Next slide, please. I just wanted to let you all know we are planning to have a national Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families training in early February in Washington State. We don't have the dates. We don't have specific dates just yet, but subscribe to OWISA's newsletter, or always feel free to email or call any of us, and we'll be happy to chat with you. Next slide, please. I just wanted to go over the certification process one more time. If you are a 4th edition graduate, you can either attend an in-person training or watch this webinar and pass the webinar test, which is going to be distributed at the end of this webinar to those folks that are 4th edition certified. If you're not a 4th edition graduate, you'll have to attend an in-person training. We'd love to see you up in Washington. I'd also like to mention that if you are a 4th edition graduate and you watch an archived version of this webinar, you'll need to let Chris Hansen know, and we'll have his contact information in follow-up emails. Great. Next slide, please. At this time, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them into the question and answer feature of your webinar software, or raise your hand and we can unmute your line and hopefully answer your question. So we'll give a few more minutes here for questions. We don't have any just yet, but we'll give a couple more minutes here for people to ask questions if they have any.
We're not, oh, we have one question pop in. There are no questions at this time. So thank you all for joining us. And if you have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can give us a call on our line at 303-774-8838 or email Chris or Caleb. It's just chris@owisa.org or caleb@owisa.org. And please join us for our upcoming webinar Thursday, December 15th at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We will be discussing winning grant proposals, which should be a very exciting webinar. And again, we'd just like to thank everyone for joining us and taking the time to learn more about the 5th edition BNC curriculum. And thank you to our partnering organization, First Nations Development Institute. Have a wonderful day.